tikavhunza mudzimu kuchikaranga, tikavhunza mudzimu kumanyika, tikavhunza mudzimu kuchikorekore, kuti nyika inotongwana nevanongoti vose zvadziye.
Nyika inovakwa nevene tisa nacho. Chatisingawirirani nacho ndechekuti iwe haugoni kuva mwene uri wega, kukanya urangana, zvanza zvinogezana, kuturika denga hubatsirana, wega haugoni kuita chunhu, kunwe rimwe haritswa nyinja.
Moshandenyu wana babai, ndimi makaramba kuteerera mashoko, zinodiwa namusiki, chonaika zvakanika. Moshandenyu wana babai, ndimi makaramba kuteerera mashoko, zinodiwa namusiki, chonaika zvakanika.
On this, the free talk with
Mutengo wehuku wakutenga sai, mutengo wehuku wakutenga sai.
Zimbabwe heads to elections in 2023, and as in any election, the laws and the rules and regulations of running elections are actually very critical, and at times are the ones that determine who will become the winner of the election. In Zimbabwe, electoral laws have always been viewed with suspicion, and they've always been a point of contention. Now, on this, the free talk with me, your host as usual, Dara Blessed Mhlanga, we're going to be discussing the electoral amendment bill that is going to go before Parliament and see if it provides an adequate, free and fair playing field, so that we do not have a contested electoral result after the polls, like has been our history. So join me after this break on this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation, as we discuss the electoral amendment bill ahead of the 2023 general elections. Welcome back to this, the Free Talk with me, your host, Dara B. Mhlanga, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation here on Heart and Soul TV and radio. We are discussing the vote to elections, the electoral bill. Now, joining me in studio to be able to discuss this electoral amendment bill, whether it provides or it goes far enough to address the issues that were raised by electoral observers in the 2018 general elections. I'm joined by the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum lawyer, Wilbert Mandinde. Thank you very much for coming through.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
We are used to staying with lawyers. Yes, Advocate Blessed Mhlanga. I'm also joined by the Director of Information and Publicity in ZANU PF, Tafadzo Mgwadi, who is also a lawyer in the making. Welcome, Kada.
Oh, thank you very much, but my senior colleagues are here, not yet one. I'm still trying to finish the relevant hopes.
Amazing. I'm also joined by another lawyer, but also the Secretary for Legal Affairs in the the Secretary for Local Government, right, in the CCC, led by Nelson Chamisa. His Worship, the Mayor of Harare as well, Jacob Mafume. Thank you very much for coming through.
Always a pleasure, Blessed.
Now
we welcome the budding lawyer with open arms.
Now, just to get us kicking, I will ask the NGO Human Rights Forum, the neutral party in this, to just give us a brief overview of what the Electoral Amendment Bill seeks to put before Parliament. What are the things that we need to appreciate?
Thank you, Blessed. And the Electoral Amendment Bill is a very short bill. Later on, I will speak about possibly its length, what it says, and possibly what it doesn't say. But what it says at the moment, it deals with, I think, only about 4 main issues. And the first being the issue of identification particulars for a person when one goes to vote. Ordinarily, when a person goes to vote, one is expected to have the ID, that is Chitupa, or a passport. The driver's license has really never been considered to be part of a document that one can produce during voting. But now it has been outlined in terms of the law that a driver's license will not be considered as one, as it does not actually reflect citizenship. Even non-citizens are entitled and may obtain a driver's license, but it does not necessarily mean that they will vote. So that's the first issue that the amendment seeks to do. The second issue deals with the issues of offences that a person can be disqualified from them standing as a candidate. Already in terms of the law, there have been offences which would disqualify one from continuing as an honourable member of parliament. But what then it has done now, the amendment brings into the fore certain offences where then it says, instead of you then being disqualified for having committed it whilst already in parliament, you can actually be disqualified from standing as a parliamentarian in circumstances in which you already have such a conviction. And there are quite a number of those that have been listed, and also it then reflects the issue of the sentence that a person would then have received, where, for example, it says if you, for any qualifying offense, you get a sentence of 6 months in custody. It therefore means that you are disqualified, and that the only ground upon which you can then be allowed to contest is upon the conviction being set aside. Upon the conviction being set aside by a higher court. For example, if you are convicted by the magistrate court, you can appeal to the high court, and when the conviction has been set aside, you can then be allowed to stand. I can quickly comment on this one to say, obviously, one of the challenges that we have always had is that the noting of any appeal against a magistrate court's decision suspends the decision of that magistrate. So I'm sort of surprised that the Electoral Amendment Act decided actually to be explicit to say the noting of the appeal shall not, but what then suspends is the quashing of the conviction. I think it's something that would need further scrutiny, but I think we can talk about that later on. And then the third issue concerns the issue of the withdrawal of a candidate for parliament. So in terms of the law, it's really not been clear in terms of what timeline is allowed for a person to withdraw. From time to time, we've had people withdrawing possibly on the doorstep of an election. On the eve of the election, people would then withdraw. But the law has basically been saying for a presidential candidate, because ballots are printed by a certain time, therefore a presidential candidate has been given up to 3 weeks, which is exactly 21 days, so anyone who withdraws within 21 is not allowed to withdraw within 21 days. So you have 22 days going to the date of the nomination court upon which you can reconsider and withdraw. But the expectation is that within 3 weeks, the ballots will now be going to print, they will be printed, and it will be a waste of resources to have ballots to be reprinted because the person would have then withdrawn as a presidential candidate. And the idea now is to bring forward such a clause to the parliamentary election where members of parliament would also, those duly nominated, would then be given an opportunity to withdraw their candidature, but can do so only up to at least 21 days before election. For those that attempted to withdraw on the doorstep of an election, they will not be allowed. Their papers will remain there, and they will just be counted as if they have been part of it, even if they go everywhere to announce that they have withdrawn. And then the last issue seeks to deal with issues or to bring to fore some issues which we saw being introduced by the Constitution of Zimbabwe Amendment number 2, and in particular the 30% women's quota on the local councillors, local government elections on councillors, as well as to bring in the youth quota. One person who is being called a youth, that is the age from 21 to 35. I'm just looking around to see how many youth we have here. But up to 35, then one per province. So it also brings in those particular 10, and then also tries to also introduce the formula upon which how that will be calculated to say who has won. So generally, these are the only issues which the amendment seeks to bring. I do not believe that if it is to be introduced in this particular manner, it will take any time to consider, because basically, in my own honest opinion, there is nothing to consider here. Blessed. So these are the issues which are there. I think if you allow me to comment further, we simply are trying to pay lip service to the aspect of the need to realign our electoral laws with the constitution. I do not believe we have done the job that is expected of Zimbabweans who pride ourselves as being very educated, learned, and we actually have some learning colleagues of ours here who really also want to break around to say we are learned. And I think as learned lawyers, we feel ashamed that as Zimbabwe, we can actually take this as one of the amendments that we want to go through and try to deal with contentious issues that we've always had towards an election. We think, and I speak generally in my own capacity, but generally for civil society, to say we think a lot could have been done. There are quite a number of grey areas which needed attention, and with only these 4 main issues that I have highlighted, we do not believe they will cover all some of the most important or some of the contentious issues. We expected that would be aligned in terms of what the Constitution says. Thanks.
Amazing. Now I want to come to you, Director Gwadi. Do you think that with this nutshell of the explanation of what the bill seeks to bring, does it provide a free and fair and level playing field for political parties as we go into 2023?
Well, thank you, Blessed. I think if you look at the amendments that have been put on the table, and if you scan them very carefully and biased and with a clear mind of a person, that is very much appreciative of the circumstances that have characterized some of our elections in the past. We must find out that indeed the major step taken was to say, let us look at our candidates. When I say at our candidates, I don't mean to say as ZANU-PF, but as a nation. To say elections in Zimbabwe have been punctuated sometimes by needless instances of violence. Of course, very scarce now compared to what we used to see in the past, and that's a fact. But although none of those cases, whether scarce or a minimum as it were, we don't celebrate them because we would wish everything associated with that could be gotten rid of our society. Now, in terms of looking at one of the major amendments, which is the question of disqualification of who would be candidates or potential candidates to an election, whether for positions of House of Assembly, Senate, or Council, or presidential, as it were. The key takeaway is that the message of preaching peace now becomes imperative as a result of the provisions of these amendments. Because these amendments will soon become law. And that become every candidate or potential candidate is therefore now obligated to shy away from associating themselves, planning, or engaging in any formula of activity that can raise reasonable suspicion that they are responsible for acts of violence, because violence, committing acts of violence or sponsoring violence, or being involved in violence directly or indirectly, is an issue that has been put on the red light by these amendments. I'm sure, looking at it as a political player, not as a civil society player, as it were, I feel government and the political parties both should embrace this as a major step to healing our society in terms of violence. Then there's also a second provision, which he talked about, no, he had not talked about it as it were, but it relates to disqualification of potential candidates over issues surrounding breach of trust, public trust or otherwise. Literally for me, that's corruption. If you have been involved, or there's reasonable suspicion that you are involved in acts of corruption, obviously what this means is that you are on the spotlight. If you are convicted, or if you have been convicted prior, according to the time frame that has been given, what becomes more clear is that you are not eligible to contest elections because you cannot serve the members of the public, and most importantly, you cannot serve, you are not of any service to the nation. This is a major step towards purifying our politics. We are trying to get rid of the twin evils of violence and corruption. And I think I must commend these as major steps. Our society needs peace. I'm happy I come from a political organization, of course, being a major player and being also a party that is the privilege to have the president of the state in the republic. We feel that this is a major step towards nationalizing his message of non-violence conduct. We must not use violence as a form of mobilizing support or galvanizing support for our political parties. We must not mobilize or charge our supporters as we move towards elections by any other things unsubstantiated but mean for purposes of talking violence. We must be a peaceful nation. I would wish that looking at these amendments, we are probably going to have the cleanest, smartest, most ever peaceful elections in Zimbabwe than we have probably had in the past. I also wish to think that due to these amendments, we are going to have people that are ready to join our presidential candidate in this message of servant leadership. Servants of the people, not people coming in to serve themselves through politics. Most importantly, I think also the amendments consolidate, like he alluded, amendments that were proposed through the second amendment, to then say our electoral act must now align to those requirements. I don't want to think, in fact, not that I don't want to think, but I remain unpersuaded and unconvinced by the learned advocate when he says these are small or few amendments. I don't know whether he's using a barometer of quantity or is looking at the quality and objective nature of these amendments. If you look deeply into the objective purposes of these amendments, you would realize that indeed these are major steps. But then it would also be good if we are going to do our listeners any favor to then say, what are those other issues that my colleague and others maybe it is probably expectable. They have issues, some of them we hear them on social media, and they have not been properly qualified to say, what exactly are they looking at that makes our elections above bar than what they are, given the legal framework that exists at the moment. I'm sure, blessed, you were in America recently. You observed elections there. It was a pleasure watching you there. You represented the Zimbabwean media community there. And I also had the privilege to watch some of the interviews you had. I'm sure by the time you went there, you thought you were going to the heart of purity of democracy and purity of electoral democracy. But I'm sure you came there with a sense of doubt, or probably a balanced sense to know that elections are not really a pure process as it were, but we must strive for purity. But there will always be challenges. There will always be grievances. There will always be propositions. But let's also look into those propositions to say, are we at a table where we can implement those propositions? Do we have the financial wherewithal? Do we have the resources, notwithstanding the political will that is there? Are we not straining our system too far to do the unthinkable under the planet, that which we have not been able to see others doing in terms of electoral democracy.
No, thank you. Now I'll come to you for your opening remarks before we interrogate some of the statements that we have had. Do you think that this amendment is sufficient to give us an election where your party will also accept the result at the end of the day?
Yes, I think we have a challenge here. These are cosmetic amendments. This is trying to put lipstick on a frog. It is a futile attempt to indicate reforms. We have outlined our issues in a document which we call Pre-Election Pact on Electoral Reforms. Now, we are very clear on the things that need to be done. If you compile the observer mission reports, they come up with over 260 recommendations. If you combine the observer mission reports, Commonwealth, SADC, all the people who came to observe our elections, they have many recommendations that go to the root and heart of our elections. And this bill simply deals with the continuation of the proportional representation with women, tries to deal with the youth, tries to deal with the provincial governments, which provincial assemblies were never put in place at all, tries to deal with women councillors, and there are glaring gaps. And where it deals with substances around the election, it does not create the freedom. It seeks to tighten the issues. Remember, the voters' roll is your indication of citizenship. An ID document is an indication of who you are. You cannot be put on a voter's roll if you are not a citizen of the country. So you cannot find some issue and legislate against it. The voter's roll itself is predicated on you being a citizen of Zimbabwe. So there's no way that you can rock up with an identity document and you find yourself in the voter's roll, yet you are not a citizen. I do not even understand why that provision to say driver. It's like somebody threw a dice or some fact and decided, oh, do you know a person can be can have a driver's license but not a citizen? Oh, let's remove that person from the voters' roll. They are not there. They cannot be there, otherwise it won't be a Zimbabwean voters' roll. You understand what I'm saying? You have your driver's license. For you to be on the voters' roll, you have to be a citizen. A driver's license is a form of identity which simply identifies you and the fact that you are allowed to drive a certain type of vehicle on our roads, irrespective of your citizen status. It's more worried about citizen, but it identifies your identity. But the voters' roll is the key marker of citizenship, because for you to be in the voters' roll, you have to be a citizen, and there's no way you are going to be there without being a citizen. Then the other clause about offences, you cannot create new disqualification criteria over and above those that are in the Constitution. Constitution does not give the legislator more powers to create new offences, add offences, and define offences. The disqualification criteria is listed in the Constitution. Otherwise, we'll have an ever-ending list of disqualifications criteria, purportedly complying with the Constitution. You cannot do that. That's clearly and patently unconstitutional. The Constitution itself will tell you what disqualifies you from being a member of parliament or being a president, and so forth and so forth. So I believe that this is trying to restrict, it is trying to create a situation where there is an umbrella disqualification of certain undesirable people according to the state. You can see the drama that is going on around job scala, the drama that is going on around Tendai BT. You can call this correctly the job scala amendment. in terms of what they intend to do and what they are trying to do. And they even want to say, even if you appeal, the Constitution allows you certain rights until the process is finished, both the first court and the appellate court. So you cannot then remove those rights using pieces of legislation. When your appeal is filed and it suspends the operation of whatever is happening, then that's the constitutional right. A person must continue with their rights. If they then are found innocent by the appellate court, irreparable harm would already have ensued. And what is that to the benefit of society except to be vindictive, malicious, and just gratuitously cruel, adding salt to wounds unnecessarily? So these amendments are not to enhance our freedoms or to enhance the constitutional freedoms or to comply with anything, save to the extent where they deal with what I call technical issues around, how do you become a youth parliamentarian, how do you become a woman parliamentarian, how do you become a member of a provincial council. There really has not been an attempt to go to the substance of the issues that we have outlined in Prepare, the issue of the voters' roll, availability of the voters' roll, the issue of violence, the issue of the results, when do they come in, when real-time preparedness of the results, security of the vote, security of the voter, a rapid results resolution system. Our court cases are not resolved as quickly as they should be in terms of when you get violence, or even when you are doing the election petition. The procedure is still steeped in technicalities. An election petition can be thrown out because a sentence is wrong, or because you didn't name a particular section correctly, and so forth. It's still steeped in the 18th or 19th century petition laws of the British establishment. It is not a modern petition system where the courts go to the substance. More often than not, it goes to technicalities about the form and nature and sentence and type of English you have used on the election petition. So that is what we need to do. We need teeth around traditional leaders. Traditional leaders are being abused and running around as commissars of his party, which demeans the office of the traditional leader. They are an elevated part of our society who should be fathers and mothers to all and not wear a partisan cloak. And that is not being reflected in this purported amendment. So we have serious challenges. It woefully falls short of the Observer Mission reports. Look at the media. Media issues have hardly been touched right around the elections. Access to the media, who becomes the media, the freeness of the operating environment, and how does it relate to elections. Some of us will never appear on national or state broadcasters except
national.
okay, on not national, on state broadcasters, despite the fact that I'm the mayor, some are honorable MPs. The only time we will be allowed to appear there is when we have allegedly committed a scandal. And so we need to take these reforms seriously. You cannot contest.
Are you prone to scandal?
I'm
prone to scandal.
I'm not prone to scandal. I'm happy that you dealt with this exam one quite efficiently. You were the one who reported. And you were reported in the state media as to say you were the whistleblower and you needed protection. But you see, I can't get the same access that you can get to clear myself should I stumble upon scandalous information. I'm the one who is lampooned. You know my struggles with Pomona, you know my struggles with many other corrupt tendencies that bedevil the council.
I want us to come to you, Mr. Mandinde, and say that when you're talking about the amendment bill, you say that it doesn't go as further to deal with the issues that you would want to see dealt with. But what are these issues that you would have wanted to see dealt with from a citizen's point of view?
Okay, I was going to give them from a citizen's point of view, as you say, but I must also declare right from the beginning that in the 2018 harmonized election, I worked with one of the international observer missions, which produced the report on the 2018 elections, and I must declare that I worked with the European Union election observer mission, and they are reported thorough recommendations, which we continue to monitor to see if they have been implemented. I think they had a half-term mission again, which came to see how the government has gone into, and quite a number of the issues that my learned colleague here has highlighted are actually most of the issues. And I was going to start with the issue of, for example, the role of the media in an election. The issue of access to the state-funded media is something that has always been coming out, and that came out largely from a number of the regional and international organizations last time, especially those who had long-term observers in the country. As Mr. Mafume highlighted, when you then go into the state media is meant then, especially during an election, meant to appear as a neutral party which gives all parties equal access. Yes, there is an acknowledgement of the fact that at times there is need to distinguish between government business and party business. But that's also an issue which becomes important. I think the issue to do with political campaign finance is something which becomes very, very important too. Yes, you cannot limit the resources within which either individuals or political parties do have. But when you then have to go into campaigning, at times people then lose it in terms of what it is that some of the campaigning transcends or ends up as vote buy, which also becomes illegal. But what we also observed, especially in the 2018 harmonized elections, was the failure at times to distinguish between government business and political party business. For example, it was easier for the president, the then who was incumbent candidate within a political party, to go and do government business, which he cannot be stopped from going to do. But immediately thereafter, there is the distribution, like you would go for government business, be it in Matabeleland South, at the government or taxpayer expense. So you have a helicopter flight, our president, and for which he is entitled to. But immediately after his meeting with provincial leaders and government ministers and everything, he then proceeds to address a political rally. So it's some of those issues where you are outside, you are looking at and you are saying, how then does it augur? Yes, you can't take it away from him. The fact that he's incumbent, he also has certain advantages that are there. Then you look in, I've already touched on the role of the media. I think there's the aspect, and I'm happy that my learning colleague here has highlighted the aspect of the issue of political violence. I think whilst 2018 there was less violence, there is issues of concern that the bill seems not to have largely touched, other than on the aspects that my colleague there referred to on violence, largely took the aspect of ways in which, and the need possibly to demand that candidates condemn violence in the strongest possible way. I think we have seen violence rearing its ugly head. I think whilst at the moment I disagree with the notion by the director here that we are headed towards one of the most peaceful elections that we can talk of, because what we have seen, we're heading towards 2023 is violence rearing its ugly head. I think we saw what happened in Kwekwe, we saw what happened in Nyatsime, and it's those issues that are there. Then you also want to deal with the issues of, I don't know how we can have non-partisan state organs. And in particular, I will make a reference to the issue of the police. I find myself in a situation in which, more often than not, I have then received instructions or briefs to represent some of the victims, or some are victims of political violence, whom I end up having to represent in courts after they have been arrested. And I give in particular the example of the first 3 people to be arrested in Nyatsime, who, after their houses were destroyed during political violence in Nyatsime, they came to us for assistance, and we recommended that they report to police. They were afraid to go to police. We deployed a lawyer to go with them to St. Mary's police. St. Mary said, no, Nyatsime falls outside our jurisdiction, it's Beatrice. We organized the lawyer again to accompany them to Beatrice, where they lodged a report on a Friday. On a Sunday, they are called to say, report to Marondera police. On Monday, they are at Marondera police, and the news that we started getting once they went there, as people who went on their own to report that their house had been destroyed, or that they were now being turned into accused persons who participated in violence. What we have seen over the last 9 months or so is the fact that, including certain cases which are of public record, including, I think, there is the Midlands guy who said Chamisa should be killed together with his children, among other things. I think there was a report by Zimbrice to the police. The guy is identified as a ZANU-PF supporter, or he might have a position within the structures, but if I am wrong, the director will be there to correct me. The issue is, even following the report by Zimbrice, we have not seen an arrest over that particular aspect. So
I just wanted, before we go, I just wanted to hear from you, just briefly. I'll come to you for the response. I think you have the response. But I just wanted to hear from the bill appears to say that if someone has been convicted successfully for and they are pardoned, they then become eligible to become a member of parliament or something like that. It's not that they are found not to be guilty, but they are pardoned of an offense that they have committed. I mean, does that make sense?
I've just been going through and in my mind trying to think about a law which allows that. And with all respect, the law that still continues to come into my mind is I think it was General Amnesty and Pardons Act of 1980, which law was brought about by the need to pardon people for offences they ostensibly would have committed or breached the laws during the Second Chamisa War. So all their activities, actually, I think it has been a long time since I last looked at that law, but it actually said people who would have participated in a just cause towards fighting for freedom, one man, one vote, what were to be pardoned. Beyond that, and actually it had deaths, which basically took us, I think, up to around the 18th of March, 1980, to say, so all offences committed, I think it came on or around that particular area, pardoning all the sins of the Second Chamisa. So this is a law which came with a specific group of people in mind, with specific deaths in mind. I've not seen a law beyond this particular issue, but I know, for example, that the president from time to time pardons people who are serving in prisons. And there has to be a distinction between a pardon and a general amnesty. Because in a general amnesty, you're saying, I release you. But when we come to the pardon, what are we saying? The president is saying, I have forgiven you. And if the president says, I have forgiven you, I'm just thinking as I went through to say, so who is likely to be forgiven here? Is there a likelihood that the president will say, I forgive all the candidates who intend to file their papers, or that he will look at his home, at his political party, and say, but he is unlikely to do the same for the other political parties. So that's the worry that I have with someone who is from outside, and I declare right from the beginning that I'm not going to be a candidate in any of the political parties.
I'll come to you. You seem to have an immediate response before.
Yeah, very really strong response, because really, the Learned Council spoke much more like a European, and no wonder why it did not come as a surprise that he was working for the EU during the observation of the 2018 elections. Because at first I would have expected to hear the voice of a Zimbabwe-based civil society organization. Now, instead of that, of getting that, I got a European perspective of Zimbabwean affairs, which really I didn't expect. And even when Jacob delayed coming, and we're magnanimous in waiting for him, I had said earlier that never mind Jacob coming, he could be well represented in the advocate because their issues are the same. But be that as it may, let me say with much more respect, my dear brother, you talked very well about the need for political parties and political party leaders to denounce violence. I don't want to know whether most of the times you'll be deaf when President Mnangagwa speaks and makes it very clear on every given occasion to say, let us shun violence as a means of mobilizing for political parties. And I'm sure when I say this, he is the only leader from whom you can extract exact words referring to that. Not anybody else outside of ZANU-PF. You can testify that even as you develop a penchant to always undermine and disrespect and always critique everything with a spirit of criticism that you have, quite so spirited and determined against it. But I know that if I were going to ask you an exact word from any one of the leaders of the opposition who spoke eloquently and clearly about violence and the need to stop it, you cannot give me exact words. You know. Now, why am I saying these things? I know that, right? Indeed, there is a symbiotic relationship between civil society and opposition in Zimbabwe. Which facts you know that we have, but that's a discussion for another day, not here. But honestly, I'm saying, if the civil society then begin to behave like a nursery bed for misbehavior from opposition and then seeks to glorify it on public platforms, it doesn't help. It simply makes the situation worse because we will have a ruling part that is magnanimous and disciplined and peaceful enough and eager to remain peaceful. But then on the left hand, we have an opposition that is stoking violence. So we would expect a civil society that will be what I would call an independent referee, not the referee that was in charge of the game between Portugal and Ghana. That also left every one of us with a lot of questions. Then when you talked about media access, yes, blessed, honestly speaking, we can't have a nation that breathes elections from the last day of the last election to the next day of the next election. I don't think it is proper for Zimbabwe. And like you said quite well, although you sought to undermine that, the president must also be understood as the president of the republic and the state, the head of state and government, and not only a president of ZANU-PF. Now, when he comes to country to commission a project, or if he comes to inspect the road, the highway from Harare to Beit Bridge, or Mchekeranwa Dam there in Marondera, or Marwanyat Dam in Mrambinda, or the Gwayan Shangan Dam that is under construction, or the water aquifers, or the orthopedic pediatric extension hospital of Mpilo in Blawai. And then party supporters says, because the president says no one and no place must be left behind, let us go and witness the good works that our president is doing there. And being a politician that he is by right, you wish our president to ignore our party supporters who have come without invitation to see him doing wonderful work. No, we will not do that because there is a party who also want to be very much accountable as we move to next year's elections in terms of what our president would have done. I don't expect civil society really to frown at that. I would understand if it was Mr. Chamisa or anyone in the Triple C doing that, or Mr. Monzoro or Professor Madu, because really, among them, there is nothing to commission, there is nothing to organize people about to say, as mayor of Harare or as the party that is in charge of Harare province, by way of having a mayor, they don't have that. So I would have expected them frowning at us doing that because they don't have anything for. Now, with regards to the question of violence you have talked about, I'm sure I was quite very shocked that the Gokwe incident involving a man that, we are not in the habit of disowning responsibility. Blessed, you can't get that from the contemporary ZANU-PF of President Mnangagwa. We don't renounce the responsibility where we have and where we should honor. The man who was threatening violence in Gokwe, through the speech that he was giving, and I regret to say that putting into context of what he was saying, that was the slogan of the party during the liberation struggle. But it has since been dropped because the party is civilized. He was saying Munakazi Pasina is not able to have, and exactly that is what was happening during the war. Everyone here, in their families, some of your fathers or veterans, they used to do that as well. They know what that means. But except that it is no place in the Second Republic, and the president was very clear about it. And when that happened, the party was very clear in all statements that no, that should stop. We didn't seek to nurture or even put into context these statements. We made it very categorical that no, this behavior is not wanted. And when your Zimrites actually did the reporting to the police, you know very well that that comrade of ours was summoned at the local police station and warned and cautioned against doing that. But one good thing about everything, you are lawyers, and that's why, yeah, I think even as well, I'm not yet one, probably next year, but one I'll be one. I would have expected you to wear this hat with pride on this discussion, to then be able to know what things you should compare and things that you cannot compare at law because they are not of the same character and length. Here is a person in Goko who has threatened the violence by way of mobilization at a rally, but his threats are out of no consequence because no violence took place in Goko as a result of that, directly or indirectly or in the vicinity or anywhere associated with his locality. Nothing of that happened. When he was cautioned, he responded and he expressed a remorse about that, and that is words. And as a party, we also did the same. Now, you take those words. I'm shocked that it is Zimrites that had reported him. Anyway, when Job Scala said what he said in Yatsimi, saying, and I quote, we will make sure that every member of this family perish whichever way we do it. That he said. Where was Zimrites or Zimbabwe Human Rights Go Forum from which you come from to have reported him for that behavior? Not only that, blessed, it is important to put the question of violence into context. On 1 August, barely 24 hours after voting, your party, Jacob Mafumi, then SMDC Alliance, led by then Nelson Chamisa, mobilized the people to cause violence and thuggery in the city center, targeting buildings and government buildings and park buildings and arson. That was seen, and a crusade of people, violent thugs was coming from forth, drunk, targeting the command center there, and you know the scenes that happened there, demanding results within 24 hours.
You shot people. You
were in the United States of America, blessed. I'm sure even by now some of the results have not yet been declared, but you are now back home. Last in the election that brought their current president, Joe Biden, you know what happened and how many months it took to have those presidential elections declared. But there were no instances except that which then happened regrettably at Capitol, when the former president wanted to refuse to lead power. But within 24 hours in Zimbabwe, a case had been created that the results had been delayed. No word from civil society. I'm shocked that still we had Zimrites by then, we had Human Rights Go Forum. No one reported those instances, and those who were behind it. Anyway, not only that, fast forward to 2019, 14 to 16 January, my brother advocate, you still had an organization Go Forum. I don't know, by then you were still writing a report on the EU's observation mission on elections in 2019. But you know what they did, which literally shut down Harare with violence. You know who were involved, and people in Christ Coalition, some had to run to South Africa, came back later when the issues and the dust had settled. But no Zimrites, not your organization, reported anyone. Now, you come here on this platform as a supposed unaligned organization. You talk about violence. You cherry pick instances that you know that it was alleged the CCC members were victims. You go to Kwekwe. You pick up an incident in Nyatsimi. But you know that when Mo Blessing Ali, there is nothing that can be far away from the truth. Mo Blessing Ali was killed by a man called Pius Jamba for reasons that every thinking man knows were not political or cannot be located anywhere near the politics. To the extent that some political party, including the party that claims to have been membership with Mo Blessing Ali, was finding it very difficult, and they failed to produce a single evidence in writing or in t-shirts or in Mo Blessing Ali's usual clothes when she was alive that She was an affiliated member of their party. None of that sort except photoshopped pictures with solidarity messages from them to claim it, which is something else, but we say may her soul rest in peace because everyone was touched. You could lose a sister in those circumstances. I could, and it's regrettable, and I'm happy Pius Jamba is in custody, and if it were me, you should rot in jail because he killed an innocent person who did not deserve it. Now, you have talked about that incident, but you don't want to refer to the fact that Job Scala mobilized the violence there and the houses were burned. The pictures are there, Mr. Ngofora. The pictures are there. Houses were burned. We lost a person who was ZANU-PF chairperson in that area, and his name is Comrade Murambachina. He died 4 days later after inhaling the carbon monoxide and the steam, trying to bring down the fire and save his children from the house. You saw that no statement from you. It was not of concern to you as a referee. What was of concern to you were 4 people who alleged their house had been burned, but you cannot even locate the house, even if we're going to ask for evidence. You can't, because the houses that were burned, they have videos of CCC members. Another one, you saw those. Shops were burned. Some were arson, some were broken down, cars were burned, roads were barricaded, houses were burned by CCC supporters hired and lorried and goneted. You saw that, Mr. Lawyer. That was of no concern to you. Just 3 weeks ago, we buried a young person, innocent blood, there at Mpeza Namo. You know the mayor should have these facts if you are in charge of the city. The man was called Elton Mavangela was killed by CCC youths there at Mpeza Namo when they were fighting over space at Mpeza Namo, and those CCC elements are in custody as I'm speaking now. You should know your members. Your members. It happened there at Mbari. But now, why am I taking all this time, blessed, to give all these facts on the table? I am saying, we as ZANU-PF, when confronted with situations that requires us to take responsibility, we own up and take it up, and we don't shy away to say we are a part of doubts, we are part of... Where there are instances, we tell it very clearly to know this should stop, because you should not commit violence in the name of ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF will not be found on the crime scene. ZANU-PF will not be taken to court. ZANU-PF as an organization will not be arrested. Its leaders who have not committed it will not be arrested. You stand with your own cross, and that is what the president says when he advises all of us to stop engaging in violence. He says, Director, if you engage in violence, unosungwa ndiwe and unosina kusungwa chinzi director, unositavazo mgwadi, wasungwa ne makai kutambilishonga. But on the other side, the civil society organizations and opposition political parties compete with each other to marinate and massage acts of violence and put lipstick, like you said earlier, and make it a beautiful frog and say, we are the victims. No, comrades, if we take that approach, both the civil society or political parties, we are not doing any favor to our society and our people. We must own up.
Thank you, Mr. Badi. I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
Nothing can be further from the truth. You cannot have such a revisionist attitude towards events that were clear. A whole ex-president of South Africa came to the Moshante Commission to investigate deaths that were not caused by the opposition. The people were shot over 90 or around there about the numbers.
No, but a report was given. Give the actual figures.
Yes.
Seven people were killed on August 1 by the Zimbabwe National Army or police forces, according to the Moshante report. 22 others were injured by bullets that came from the military or the Zimbabwe Republic Police, according to the Moshante Commission.
So, where are the 19 coming from? Why do we have a pension to inflate figures? We take responsibility because our government called upon that commission to take place to take responsibility.
One is more than enough.
One is not 19.
Yes,
that's what I just wanted you to know.
One is more than enough. And these are Zimbabwean citizens. And what we need to do is to be able to say, this report has not seen the light of day, and we are already approaching another.
The report is there.
The recommendations have not been implemented. The compensations, the prosecutions, the various things that are supposed to have been done in terms of that Moshante report, and we are approaching another elections, they have not been done. The recommendations have not been done. Can you name one that has been done?
Yes, I can name it. Now let me be very clear, Blessing. It would appear as if when people hear about recommendations of the Moshante Commission, they would then say the Moshando Commission was awash with recommendations blaming or blemishing government and ZANU-PF as it were. Let's be honest. Remember, we are on a public platform. The Moshando Commission recommended that, in fact, identified that there were two sorts of problems. Problems created by the reaction that took place following the incidents. But the first problem was also the behavior of those that triggered events that caused the election. And they were very clear about it, that the actions of the violent protesters was needless and unprovoked. They also went further to say
there been compensation?
the political parties, when,
But you gave him the time.
No, I didn't.
I just wanted to respond.
I said one.
You said
Yeah.
So
They say
It's failed.
the political parties and political
Yes,
leaders,
failed name one.
we still have the time anyway. They say
No, I don't have.
political parties,
Yeah.
when they are campaigning, they must desist from stoking violence through messages that provoke or incite unsuspecting members of the public. And you know who was labeled, and they said in their recommendation, they said it would have appeared from the messages coming from opposition parties during campaign that their message was stoking and charging young people to engage in violence.
Okay,
That's what I was saying.
Can I give him
The government is to respond.
I want us.
They say
I've given you an opportunity.
No one
Can I allow him to say?
I wouldn't want to appear as if I was saying the commission's report blamed them as well. I'll be factual. On the side of government, they said the government's response to the violent protesters was needless and disproportionate. It was clear. They said those victims must be compensated. You get what I'm saying? They then say Zimbabwean political parties and systems must develop a culture of dialogue to ensure that depolarization within the society, and those are the major talking points that came from them. So I'm saying, let us look at
Okay, fine.
issues.
Not
from sectarian perspective.
His Worship the Mayor, if I give you an opportunity to speak, you must state your facts, because if you ask him to come through, I'll let him, because you'll have asked him. So state your
When I
facts.
say he must stop, you should say you must stop him because I've said he stop. You cannot. You cannot choose. You cannot choose.
Sorry for going
You
over
cannot.
around.
You cannot choose Gamma instructions.
Please go ahead.
Selective. I've given two instructions, and it was a rhetorical question. It is a literal device. It is not an invitation to jump into the conversation. It's rhetoric. Some of us, he's a learning colleague. I'm sure those devices might elude him. But when I ask a rhetoric question, I don't expect him to dive head first into a rhetoric question. It is a language device that you allow. But the issue here is very simple. There was a Moshante report which has not been implemented, which recommendations have not been implemented. Inter alia, compensation, prosecution, and so forth, and changing of the laws to avoid such things happening. And one of the issues is the delay of an independent mechanism of dealing with the security sector as envisioned in the Constitution. And only an act or a bill has just been gazetted, and it's taking long for that to be implemented. So we are struggling with that. Then we had the by-elections. The by-elections that have been occurring. You saw what happened in Ngai to one of our legislators, no less, MP Tofa, who was beaten by individuals who were driving cars that had labels from his party, twin caps. They were beaten. It was captured on video as people who were campaigning in Matebeleland in the by-elections were confronted, were blocked access, and they were beaten. And these were predominantly women legislators and women canvassers of the vote. Nothing has happened on that. Madam Tofa has to come to Parliament with bandages and things all over. And she was campaigning. The only crime that was there is that she was campaigning for a candidate in the by-elections. The other by-elections, as you saw, have been rife with. That's why Mantinte has been saying that we have a problem heading towards the elections. The by-elections environment has not been conducive for our supporters to campaign freely. They've been confronted, they've been blocked, some have been beaten with evidence, with videos. And the people who are driving the cars with his emblems and signage beat up people, and they speak on video in terms of the election. So all this talk about being non-violent is simply a lip service. And as we head towards another election, and that has to be dealt with, because if you don't deal with that in terms of the law and the legal framework, then you're going to have a problem. You saw what happened with the police permissions to rallies. Not one of their rallies was ever denied permission. We had scores and scores of our rallies in the by-elections being denied permissions. And some where permission had been given, it will be withdrawn overnight, and the place will be cordoned by police people. The place will be cordoned by people who have not been invited. At some of the venues, you'll have his political supporters pretending to be playing a soccer match so that they could then stop us from doing the campaigning. You'll have police mounting roadblocks. You will have meetings being denied the permission. And that is the reforms that we expected in this bill, so that the police do not act in a partisan manner in terms of denying us access to our electorate, access to the supporters, and also fairness in terms of when the incidences are reported. So that's all coming from his side of the divide, and that is what we need to correct in terms of when we bring any amendment to the law. And should that behavior continue, we should be able to then have provisions that punish such behavior. And that provisions are not there. We have a code of conduct for political parties, but that code of conduct is not justiciable. It is more of a gentleman's agreement when you have him and his party who cannot fit into the description of gentlemen. So we have a problem of that code of conduct not being enforceable. Then the issue of the media. The issue of the media is problematic, and it's endemic. There is a fear of liberating the state broadcasters to allow equal access, not even equal access. We've called for equitable access, which recognizes maybe the last result by percentage or by some formula that can create what you call equity. And even under that tilted status of equity, they will not allow supporters and campaigners of our party to be part of the of what comes out of the state media. So this impunity that is exercised by members of his party during the by-elections, that bias that is exercised by the police when we campaign and we seek permission to campaign, and the issue of the results and the inability or the impotence of the courts in dealing with electoral related offenses and issues and petitions is what the electoral environment in this country has to deal with. If it did not deal with those, and we have clearly outlined those issues in our document called Prepare, and we have said we are willing to deal with item by item and be able to help this country to come up with an election that will not be disputable. Otherwise, this is not an election.
Mr. Mbadi says that your supporters killed their supporter in Bali in Pedzanamo.
I don't know what he's talking about. No,
I can't lie names here.
No, but I don't know. There was no political event that we attended.
The clash is
in
over.
Bali. What I know is that what I know is that Mopedzanamo is the hotbed of their vigilante group called Chipangani, which is an extremely violent group which had members like Jim Kunaka, and they have members that are continuing not only extortion, but they are making people pay for space to make their wares to sell. They make the whole place unmanageable.
I just want him to
I
respond to allegations.
not if there has been an incident where someone died in Mbare, which is unfortunate and regrettable. But what I know is that in Mbare and Mpedzanamo, members of his party have laid siege not only to the whole community, they've laid siege to council properties, they've laid siege to the individuals there, and they've caused acts of what do you call it? Malicious damage to property and so forth. And no member of ours is engaged in those activities.
I want us to get to a point as Zimbabweans where what responsibility do we take to this violence? What is the responsibility? What responsibility? And an attempt for us to be able to move forward, because what I see here is escalation rather than convergence of Zimbabwe.
Yeah, but I cannot take responsibility for something that is probably being investigated by police. If the police come to that conclusion.
When you say the Mponimwe was killed, the police come to the conclusion. But here is what I just want to say through you, Chair. I think when I raised these issues, I must tell you that even if I wear the political jacket that I can't remove or disassociate from even on this platform, I have an inner feeling in me that certain things must not continue. We are young enough to frown at certain things happening on our side. And if we can't take responsibility at this age, to condemn, just simply to condemn, to send a message to say, this is not good, whoever is doing it, then what kind of responsible young people shall we be if leadership in the generation of
our leadership is no
responsibility to us sometime in the future?
I have no blood.
Why am I saying
our leadership is no blood in it?
You see, this is
we have
where
no blood in our hands.
This is where we have
no problems. No avenging spirits are following us.
You say
we have not killed anyone.
Okay.
I have never.
I hope the public knows.
In my presidency.
Maybe for a moment.
For a moment.
Can the two of you? For the two of you, can I?
I'm asking you to ask a question.
Yes.
We know that Mo Blessing Ali was killed in
Nelson Chamisa
by a man called
Mr.
We know that Mo Blessing Ali was killed in Yatsima by a young man called Pius Jamba who is in custody. No, wait. Why are we jumping custody? When she was killed, everyone condemned that, and I'm happy that guy Pius Jamba, whoever he is and whatever position he occupies.
But I think, Director, the issue is that we should move beyond condemning, shouldn't we? Right. We should move towards taking action.
May I ask you this question? Yes. Now, I've attended so many interviews with you here, Blessing. I've always asked you, are these colleagues combined, whatever groups they represent in their collusion rather, saying after Mo Blessing Ali died, the lorries that were mobilized by Job Scala and his part, the Mr. Nelson Chamisa's part, to come to Nyatsime, which were ferrying people on broad daylight and to triple social media. Those who are watching us can watch those videos and they've seen them. Marora yangareza mpira. Vana vaya vaenda kunopisa dzimba nemavideos ari kuplaya. You know those videos, Blessed, where people are stoning houses, where people say unouya itema motikari yendike. You know what was happening? Are we agree? Are we saying but what's like the there is ZANU-PF? If we are agreed they are not ZANU-PF, let's hear from these ones who will say those people. I want to hear.
Maybe, but just before I give you, Mr. Mandit, the opportunity to speak, we did take those videos that you're talking about, where people who belonged to the Triple C rather were engaging in those orgies of violence.
Let's hear from them. You are not taking responsibility.
No, I
say they can't.
We have evidence of those videos. We did film those videos.
Can you put them to their defense?
But yes, I'm going to do that. I want us to come to this point, gentlemen. I want us to come to this point because I find that this is the issue that continues to escalate violence. Right? Yes. We must get to the root cause of things and we must deal with them instead of condemning them.
I agree.
Right? The police failed to act when a councillor who clearly said there was ZANU-PF was banning a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a video to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And these issues of not acting and not giving solutions by police, by leadership, are very dangerous.
That's another incident. You know, Blessed, don't justify on their behalf.
No, I'm not justifying.
Okay, what happened in 2019? Had the same councillor banned a funeral in
But the Moshate
Okay,
on 1 August.
Okay, let's hear from.
I'm seeking your input. I'm saying you said you saw them.
You cannot move from one incident.
Yes.
I want to move
from
one incident to another.
Let's see.
Can we hear
your debates
from this guy?
The Moshate report has not been implemented. You have failed.
Right, moderate.
Yes.
I find myself in a very difficult space at the moment. And earlier on, before we started, I think you were taking this seat. And I said I needed you to sit between the two protagonists. And I think I was right. I think I should have been sitting further from this stage.
We are 3 protagonists.
Yeah.
I thought that's one.
No. I'm going to explain. Number one, the whole idea behind this discussion is to discuss the electoral amendment bill.
Yes.
That's the first. And along the way, we seem to be losing the plot. We are supposed to be discussing the electoral amendment bill. An issue which I raised was the fact that I am not really convinced that the bill is touched largely on issues to do with political violence. And I have given examples. So I spoke about political violence and I spoke about the issue of state actors who are supposed to act in a non-partisan manner. And I gave the example of the police and I gave examples. We basically all agree, including the learning colleague, that indeed police should be non-partisan in the manner in which they act. He gave the example of the Gokwe, where he then says, I should have compared like for like, and that the police then, in this particular case, was he incited violence. His incitement did not result in people becoming violent.
But you are an advocate. You know what is called an actor's rear and a man's rear in criminal offense. Here was an intention that did not come out.
Moderator, I'm still on the floor. I'm still on the floor. And all I really need to highlight is the fact that the point I made was the need for more issues to have been raised insofar as this bill is concerned. I will reiterate my earlier point that the 4 issues, while some of them I've applauded and I've acknowledged, my point is really that these are not the only issues which needed. He spoke about the aspect to do with quantity versus quality. I actually argue that, and I submit that the issue is in terms of both. The quality needs to be looked into. Yes, there are certain issues, and I think I've made certain comments regarding the quality, and I reiterate again that there are certain issues which I said it's fine, even in terms of quality. But it does not necessarily mean to say that if the quality on 2 or 3 is excellent, we then neglect everything else. So it's not just about quantity, but also about the need to look holistically at issues which are and affect the smooth running of an election. I'm not going to dignify certain issues with responses like my being European or being influenced by Europe, but I think I need to remind Mr. Mugwadi that the issue to do with the violence in Yasime, there have been responses, and he was one of the panelists who attended the Twitter space which the NGO forum hosted. Over and above that, there were even letters which were written to political parties, CCC included, ZANU-PF included, and I must also mention that the ZANU-PF letter was rejected on the simple reason that it was addressed to the ZANU-PF spokesperson and not the Secretary for Administration. But a letter went there, and another letter which went to His Excellency the President, Comrade Mnangagwa, to say, police leaders and as the head of state, please condemn and castigate violence, and a general statement to that particular issue. I thought this I should respond to. But the main issues, gentlemen, we are discussing here are about this particular bill. When you want to discuss about the other issues, like, for example, the topic you want now to introduce, to say how can people do an election without violence. Bring in the NPRC, for example. It has an obligation to deal with national peace and reconciliation. Bring in the NPRC. Bring in the Gender Commission, for example. Women are crying out there because there are certain issues which they feel they are not being protected. Bring in these political players. But for us who would have come to discuss the Electoral Amendment Act, and then you start raising such particular issues, I think it could be time that I also be excused. And you can remain with the two.
We want disagree.
Right. So I need us to state
We need to
that
talk about the bill.
these issues, the issues that arise, are the issues that arise because of this bill. If this bill was addressing those issues, we would not be having this conversation and discussion. So when we raise these issues and how they affect the election, we are actually inputting into the bill to say this is what is missing in the bill, this is what should be in the bill. Because as we raise this debate and we have this conversation, we actually see where the problems are and what needs to be done. But unfortunately, we have run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you to do your concluding remarks. But what I find very, very important and instructive for us as Zimbabweans is that we need to look beyond power retention. We need to do laws
Or power seeking.
or power seeking, whatever it is.
Because power retention is as well power.
Yeah.
If you say we should look beyond power retention, you are saying all these challenges are caused by people who are trying to retain power.
Yes.
Yet you know that they
You've
are
said it
thugs who are
yourself.
seeking to
I
get power
I
through the back door.
agree with
You are
you.
trying
I
to
agree with you,
give power
Director.
by all means necessary.
Laws must not be made for power retention or for power seeking, but must be made for the greater good of our nation.
I agree with you.
So we need to have that. I mean, as we close as leaders from political parties and leaders from civil society, I would seek from your concluding remarks that we make, overtures towards building a peaceful and better Zimbabwe, other than entrenching and getting deeper into our trenches.
I agree.
I'll start with you as well.
I agree, and I always say, look at your age, look at yourself into the mirror. Do you want to be a victim of violence one day? You know you don't want. The same manner you don't want is the same manner the next person doesn't want, notwithstanding the differences of their views with you. And again, look at yourself into the mirror. Don't be deceived by your false muscles, Advocate Martinde or Jacob Mafume or myself, as Mkwale say. I can only be a perpetrator, not a victim. One day is just one day. You're gonna be a victim yourself. So why am I saying this? It is because I trust in the wisdom of the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, the President of my party, Comrade Edim Nangabu, who has said, and I quote, never involve violence as a yardstick of mobilization or galvanizing support for the party, because if you do so, you will carry your cross. When I raise this message, I know that so many ZANU-PF supporters, members, affiliates, and associates all over, they know they can watch this message. I'm telling you, this is not my message. This is the message of your president. We expect, however, the opposition to reciprocate that. We expect, however, the civil society organizations to be also responsible, to not take sides when violence has taken place, to also accept where they would have erred and abandon the approach where they feel that they express ZANU-PF supporters as people of no rights, as if rights only exist within the ring and file and membership of the opposition. That way, we are not helping any situation. We are plunging ourselves further into polarization. And this is where the Second Republic seeks to extricate us to a better society of a middle-income economy, not a violent economy. Violence doesn't produce any goods, doesn't produce any products, doesn't produce any services. It is safe to destroy. We can only build this country on our own hands, shunning violence, embracing with the never.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mandini. You're concluding.
I think we would start with political parties the next one.
I know you can go ahead.
Okay. I think generally, as I conclude, I want to reiterate what I have stated about this amendment. Yes, there are certain issues which the attempt is noted, but in terms of proper realigning with the 2013 Constitution, there are certain issues which remain pending and hanging, and I hope those particular issues will be taken care of. Regarding the issue of violence, I certainly agree with Mr. Mgwadi on the need for non-violence, on the need also for, as he said, to say, let's look at ourselves in the mirror and to say what we want. I hope, as Mr. Mgwadi was saying, let's consider ourselves not as perpetrators but as victims. I think he's not really saying that he knows those who could perpetrate it against us. But also, I think what becomes important for me is whilst he has continued to highlight what the president has said, we have also seen other leaders of the same political party instigating violence. So at times you then end up thinking, is ZANU-PF indicating left and turning right?
Okay. As I speak here, this is easier on my tongue. I work and serve President Advocate Nelson Chamisa, whose hands have no one's blood on them, whose hands are not in any way an instrument of violence, but they've been instruments of love, instruments of hope, instruments of the future. We have repeated even before that we will not seek power over the bones or the dead bodies of anyone. And we've been true to that anthem. We've been true to our word. We have reached this point without the blood of anyone on our hands. And I know Advocate Nelson Chamisa is a man of peace, is a man of God, and is a man of love. And we will continue on that path. What we will do is to give hope to Zimbabweans, that we will take them to where we need to take them without the blood of compatriots on our hands. We have reiterated on many occasions that we are a peaceful party in name and in deed, and we have done that. And as we move towards the elections, and as we look at these various laws, we know as a party we've attended too many funerals. We know as a party we are taking care of many widows. We know as a party we have wiped away the tears of many of our compatriots from their eyes. And in all those instances, we've been victims, not the perpetrators. But we know that very soon we will be able to have a Zimbabwe that is peaceful for all, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of religious affiliation, regardless of political beliefs, and even where they criticize us the most. We believe that a country can only be built by love and can only be built by peace and can create a smart society for everyone. As for these amendments, they fall short of our expectations. They fall short of the expectations of Zimbabweans. They fall short of any standards that are required in a democratic society. And we will continue to push, as we have outlined in our prepared document, for amendments and a law that gives hope and removes fear from the hearts of Zimbabweans. And in conclusion, I repeat, Advocate Nelson Chamisa, hands have no one's blood in them. Thank you.
Right. The Zimbabwe Election Support Network says in its statement on this bill, it says that ZESNI believes that the bill addresses nominal and administrative reforms while ignoring pertinent reforms that may have a direct bearing on the transparency and credibility of elections in Zimbabwe. For instance, the removal of the driver's license as proof of identity is purely nominal in the Zimbabwe, as the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has always declined it as proof of identity for election purposes, for example, during voter registration and voting. Here on Heart and Soul TV and radio, and me as your host, Dara Blessed Mklang, we call on leaders, our political leaders, we call on us as individual Zimbabweans to ensure that whatever it is that we do it towards building a more prosperous and united Zimbabwe. We call on you, compatriots, fellow Zimbabweans and fellow citizens, to avoid being used to destroy your own country in the name of attaining or retaining power. It is important to know that the nation goes beyond power and politics. It is about humanity. It is about us being the people of Zimbabwe together. I call on those in power those who have state apparatus who are bestowed upon by the constitution to maintain peace in this country, to ensure that they do not push their own citizens to want to do what is called self-help. They must get help from the institutions created by the constitution when they go to get it. The law must not only be done, but it must be seen to be done. Lady Justice is blind to politics, to color or creed. It is for all people. The Constitution of Zimbabwe states, we the people. It does not state political party, does it? This is Free Talk. This is Heart and Soul TV and Radio. And I, your host, Dara Blessed Mhlanga, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation. And thank you very much, my guests, for this amazing discussion. Let us carry it to our various designations and let us continue to engage as people of Zimbabwe. Thank you very much.